Ok. Hallo alle sammen, og velkommen. We're going to do this event in English. This is an event in UKS's series that's called Commune, which is an event series in which we're inviting in people from our broader arts and culture community in a variety of programming here in these still quite new spaces that we're in. And my name is Drønen, and I was until very recently the interim artistic director here, and I'm very happy to be back this evening to moderate this conversation. And we're also very happy to welcome two archives into the space that's in here, which I think some of you have seen a bit already, and that we're going to talk more about. And also we have with us the two people behind them. And they will go more in depth about their respective archives and this quite eclectic presentation. But before we start, I will give some brief introductions to the archives and the people in the panel. So the International Library of Fashion Research was founded in 2020 and opened its physical space at Aker Brygge in 2022. It archives, preserves, and mediates fashion's printed matter. The library's holdings consists of more than 15,000 objects of books, magazines, and other kinds of ephemera, dating from 1975 until present. Through curatorial, editorial, and educational projects, the collection is continuously activated. And with us from the library, we have its founder, Elise Olsen. From the collection of is curator Geir Haraldseth, library and archive. The collection is currently deposited at Rogaland Kunstsenter in Stavanger. Thousands of books and magazines covering contemporary art, lifestyle and fashion from the 1960s and until today is available for the public in the Art Center's opening hours. And Geir, who will tell us more about this, is also a curator at the National Museum here in Oslo. Then from UKS, Kaja Breckan will tell us more about the fragmented physical archive of parts of UKS's 100 years of existence. The archive is today owned by Riksarkivet and was actively researched in the years ahead of UKS's 100th anniversary in 2021 in relation to both a big anniversary exhibition, which was at Kunstneres Hus, and publication. And Kaja was on the editorial board of this book. She is UKS's longtime office manager, recent interim administrative director, and also accidental archive manager. So that was brief introductions to these different archives. And I thought we would start by each of you telling us a bit more about them. And maybe you, Elise, could start with saying some things about why and how you founded this library.
Yes. Can we get this Madonna mic to work? This is a very nice setup. Thank you to UKS for inviting me and us into this conversation and for generously inviting me to go through some of the UKS archive holdings earlier this week. So the International Library of Fashion Research was, as Live mentioned, founded in 2020. We started it as a digital institution. It was during COVID, and it was based on a seed donation that was given to me by my long-term mentor, Stephen Mark Klein, who I got in contact with through a project of Geir and me and Jeppe Ugelvik, another curator, called Wallet, which was a fashion commentary publication. And Geir and I went to New York to visit Stephen and to do other exciting things in New York. But then he proposed me with his collection and asked me if I wanted to inherit 5,000 objects, roughly, of books, magazines, but mostly branded material. So from the fashion industry. So branded material means lookbooks, catalogs, show invitations, press releases, and so on. And so I said, you know, of course, I would be super delighted and super honored to receive such a collection and to continue to work with it. Stephen didn't collect this material for it to be publicized. He collected it for his own kind of research. He was also working as a graphic designer and a cultural theorist in New York. So I think, you know, I accepted it, but I said I have no kind of space or kind of domestic space to store it or to continue to preserve it. But in tandem with this discussion and this generous offer from Stephen, I was in dialogue with Stina Högqvist at the National Museum of Norway, and in occasion of the consolidation of the Crafts Museum and the National Gallery and the Contemporary Art Museum and the Architecture Museum, the National Museum had decided to continue or to start a kind of archival strategy, which was about collecting Norwegian contemporary fashion. So I said, well, if you're going to start collect this amazing material, maybe it would make sense to create a kind of educational center or a publicly open library based on Stephen's holdings. So the museum said yes, and it took a little while to kind of find what kind of form it was going to take, also seeing as it's a free and open library. And so we opened our doors in November 2022. So today it's more than tripled the collection through donations from fashion houses, publishing houses, and private collectors. And we basically specialize in this kind of branded material that is very much disposed of in the industry, and material that is circulated within a very sort of gate-kept environment to press, to retailers, to VIP customers, and to people who had a special interest, such as Stephen. So yeah, that's basically the founding premise of the project, and it's not I don't consider it an archive. I consider it a library because it's also possible to touch and use, and it's supposed to be used and grappled with. Yeah.
Thank you. Geir, how did you start collecting all of your materials?
I think we've been talking about this in the case of hoarding, just accumulating stuff over a long time. And the difference between being a hoarder and having an archive is a thin line, I guess. But yeah, I think you mentioned Stephen, and I guess I'm a Stephen too, just collecting stuff for my own personal research. So some of the examples also brought in are kind of representative of that research, but I'm not into astrology, but I read somewhere that Geminis like libraries and bookstores and magazine stores, so I guess that's true, because I've always been attracted. Huh? So we're in the right season? The right season, yeah, Gemini season, bring on the publications. But it was just, I started collecting as soon as I had money, I guess, just buying fashion magazines, stuff that was like before the internet, you could access other worlds through printed matter. So that was kind of, you know, you had TV of course as well, but it was a different medium that you could actually access. So buying the face or ID or anything that was like titillating and exciting and, you know, trying to research the world through magazines and printed matter, and also being like a nerd. So then books in general was also interesting. And I worked at the library at school a lot as well, like in the library as a library assistant. And I did that at Central St. Martin's as well for fashion and fine art. And at the museum as well. I was working at the Museum of Contemporary Art here in Oslo at the library. So just like getting to know what they are interested in and kind of figuring out what I'm interested in, which isn't necessarily the same thing as the National Museum. I have responsibility for the national, right? But I have a responsibility for myself, so I can sort of follow my own tastes and collect what I really want to prioritize and spend my money on. And as a Norwegian curator, you're also quite privileged, so you can go in residencies. So a lot of my stuff has also been collected while traveling. So in a residency in Berlin or New York or Rio, you can access these printed matter from different cities and countries and sort of get to know those places also through their books, magazines, and printed matter. I always pick up press releases when I go to see shows, all those things, and sometimes even the institutions don't have them. So it's kind of like, I have them. But I guess it's also splitting the, like my mom was like, what are you going to do with all these books? So I was like, I'm going to make them public, Mom. I'm going to do everyone a big favor. And then, so when I took up the directorship at the Rogaland Kunstcenter, a small regional art center in Stavanger in 2012, I decided to make the library public there. So all the books and magazine could be public. And then I have also all the archive material with press releases and stuff that we didn't have enough staff to actually make accessible. But I guess that's a future for my retirement plan. Be surrounded by books. Yeah.
Where did you have the archive or the collection before Rogaland? Did you have it in your home?
Storage spaces.
Yeah.
I had a storage space in New York as well. That's the last place I lived for a long time, and then before Stavanger and Oslo. So I had a storage space there, which was also accessible to my friends. So you had a PIN code you could use on the door to the storage space, and then you had to know the key, the number lock for my storage space. And there was a nice chaise lounge, and then the books were actually on shelves in the storage space, so you could access them. Only 2 friends did, but it's public. Limited audience for those in the know. Yeah, the VIPs. Yeah. But also, all the stuff that you're talking about, the promotional material that you get in a store, that's kind of the press releases from the gallery. So there's a lot of similar interests that Elise and I share as well. Yeah.
Is there a lot of overlapping content in your archives? Do you know?
There's a few things. Also interesting combinations, I guess, as well. Because we also had the conversation about whether my library should be part of the International Library of Fashion research as well. But I think this sort of shapes it in a different direction yet. So maybe in the future, but...
Yeah, and I think it's also something about this kind of archival autonomy, or the kind of profile of these different archives, and how do you treat that? And that's also something that we're dealing with now with the library and the continuous growth that we're facing. I mean, one thing is the space, but also how do you categorize stuff? How is it displayed on the shelves? Now we've chosen to do a kind of very conservative, alphabetized sort of display. So every brand has its own kind of box, and then within the brand's framework, there's also the type of material. So there's ephemera, miscellaneous ephemera. There's catalogs, and then there's magazines and books, and then within that again, there's a chronological order that we try to keep up with, but it's a little bit hard with people coming in and actually taking things out of the boxes and using it and so on.
That's a different star sign.
Yeah, that's the Scorpio.
Yeah.
But I think also what you're saying about the promotional material is also what's interesting, and goes back to what I said about the kind of disposability of the material that we're treating and that we're working with and collecting. That kind of proved itself to especially to us during COVID, as we were waiting to open this library physically, and we decided to hold on until all of the various lockdowns were finished. I know we don't want to be reminded of these times, but it was interesting in the fashion industry, because as we know, the fashion industry is such an apparatus. It's such a fast-paced machine, and I think what we were hoping, especially people working on with an arm's length to the fashion industry, was that it was going to slow down, that this this continuous repetition and this kind of this seasonal craziness in fashion was going to kind of slow down a bit. And what happened in the very beginning was that a lot of brands put their production on hold, not just material production, but also immaterial production. So of course the collections were delayed or, skipped a season because they couldn't actually physically produce the clothes. But another thing was content and campaigns and so on. And that lasted for a very, very short amount of time. And then, it went back to normal. And then after COVID, you can also kind of argue that it's gone even crazier than before because of compensating for the loss of capital, commerce, and
revenue.
Yeah, revenue. But what they were facing, a lot of the fashion houses during that time, like you say, the institutions don't necessarily keep the press releases or the price lists. That was also the same in fashion. So it became very obvious to us that to collect all of these, a multitude, not just one exclusive fashion house, but a multitude of fashion houses, was also giving back to the industry and opened up for a different kind of study of the ecosystem around the designers and around the textile production. Yeah.
And I think, speaking of the craziness of the pace, that's also the case for the art scene, I would say, looking at UKS's archive, I think, which is, as I said, quite fragmented. Yeah, and maybe you want to speak a bit more about that, being the expert on this archive.
Well, I'm sort of the old lady in the room here. I'm representing UKS's 103-year-old archive, which is a very fragmented and crazy archive, I think. It's it's institutional and organizational, and there's a lot of, as your archives are very good looking and you have good looking stuff, our archive is full of like mail correspondence and handwritten notes, and it's quite amazing. So it dates back to 1921, and it was delivered to Riksarkivet in 98, before we sort of went digital. And it's a very nice collection, and if anybody's interested in seeing any of it, just let me know. Yeah. So it's with us for now, and it has been really fun to work with it up to the 100-year anniversary that we had in 2021 to facilitate visits in the archive from art historians. And now Elise was the last one, and you just opened a random box and found something interesting.
I really recommend going in to see it. I mean, it was really a nice experience. There was a lot of applications and a lot of kind of bureaucracy, I think, but then there was also a lot of like pamphlets and the price lists and the press releases and things that could be very interesting to do a bigger research thing on. I was there for 2.5 hours, and yes, I did, and asthma and with the dust like we're all always used to. Yeah.
Yeah, and the UKS archive, I mean, is of course completely different from your archives in its purpose and also how it's been collected and how things have been stored has been very different with the different, I guess, people who's been involved in the organization, and how much weight it has gotten has varied. But I guess it was a very important tool, especially with the publication that you also worked quite a lot with.
And also say the anniversary book is free if you want to grab one when you leave.
Yeah. And it had a lot of different, then we had a lot of different writers kind of go into 10 years each, right? 20 years each, yeah. So then it was a bit easier than just going right randomly at it. But for this presentation, we have kind of tried to just put some materials together. And so maybe you could say something about what you chose to bring here this evening. And maybe you want to start, Geir.
Well, yeah. I brought books, publications, and like printed matter by 3 artists that I'm interested in, and interested in like a book way. So like figuring out what publications they were making while they're still alive, what happened after they passed away. So one of the artists that I'm really interested in is Paul Thek, an American artist born in 1933, died in 1988, made a lot of very complicated work, and I think it was a complicated person, which is super interesting. But then when he dies, what happens? Are these complications gone? Is the work, some parts overlooked? A lot of the work was destroyed. So there's documentation archive is the only way to access those works. The works that are preserved are more conventional works, paintings and bronze sculptures and things like that. And then the large installations and the crazy rituals he made with children and his group of collaborators in Europe. Those are the kind of things that are missing. So, so what happens in the publications that are coming after? How do they deal with like those complications of being a person? I don't know. So those are the kind of things that I'm interested in. So I brought 4 publications by Paul Thek that were made when he was still alive, and then one that's made after he passed. There's a lot of more publications after he passed that I didn't bring, but these have this sort of material quality to them that I start drooling when I see them, because you access the past in a way. You can do that, you can Google stuff and go on Wikipedia and see stuff, but this is like more like a time travel, like a prosthetic memory. That's also been a term used to sort of access the past through objects. That's also maybe sometimes happens in a museum, when you can access stuff in a museum and sort of time travel, or like go to another context. It happens with film and music as well, but like all these things that are magical experiences people can have in their brains. I bought 2 books by Florine Stettheimer as well, an artist born a bit earlier, 1870s, and died in 1944. Quite like a successful artist in her time, but now not so known. She's kind of like, people in the art world know about her, but I don't think many in Norway know her, except for Kaja Breckan, another UKS friend. Anyway, these paintings are also kind of crazy. They are kind of like documenting her social life, but also with tons of humor. And I was just interested in seeing how they were received when she was still alive. Like if you go to a museum and see a painting of your crazy friends, or like the sort of high society things at MoMA, how would that go down? So some of the publications, I haven't been able to get so many of her publications that happened when she was alive, and publications have also evolved and changed. So a publication from 1919 is different from one that's from 2019. There's difference in techniques, of course, but also what kind of material you put in. So like the earliest MoMA catalog from 1946, made 2 years after she passed away, most of the illustrations are in black and white, while these are very vibrant paintings. So like, what does that say? Is it a snooze fest, or can you imagine these paintings come alive? And the last artist I chose to bring is Mark Camille Heimowitz, who was born in 1947, passed away just a couple of days ago. And that's an artist whose work is really hard to grasp. Again, another complicated artist, working with design and art and these environments, installations, all these things. So the books are for me a way to like try and grapple with it, but he was so involved in designing the books as well, because he was interested in design. So they sort of bear his fingerprints as well, not just in the works presented, but how they're made. So those are kind of things I brought along. And then, of course, there's all these obsessions for me personally, and it doesn't end. How will this end?
There's also a postcard of an Albrecht Dürer hair out there. Yeah.
And then I think one overlap with what I saw Elise bring is Comme des Garçons. Because Comme des Garçons have used a lot of artists in their promotional material, printing maybe these tiny leaflet publications that produced mostly in Japan. But Paul Thek was one of the artists that Comme des Garçons decided to work with. So they produced 20 plus small magazines featuring his work. And I felt that actually those promotional material captured the complexity of the artist better than a lot of the publications presented by the museums. Because the museum is making sure that this is legible, while Comme des Garçons makes it enjoyable, makes it desirable. So that was kind of the big difference in approach. So I have some of those, but I didn't find them today. So that's my bad, but there is this connection there that I think was quite interesting, but with like what fashion can do and what art can do, how they're similar or not. Looking at Kim working in between. Anyway.
Yeah, and this was also something we spoke quite a bit about in advance when we were planning this event. If like these overlaps and intersections and differences between, you know, art material produced in an art context and fashion context, and that's probably also a good place for you to speak about the materials you brought and also the ones you picked out from UKS's archive.
Yes, I think that the sort of the parallel between artist books and fashion printed matter has become very obvious, and was also the gateway of my mentor Stephen's collecting practice. He was collecting artist books and monographs and so on in the beginning from a kind of School of Visual Arts perspective, because he went there. He was a peer of Basquiat and Julian Schnabel and these people, and he was collecting all of this printed matter, and in order to sustain his life in New York, he had to sell them off in the early end of the 70s, early 80s, and then he discovered Comme des Garçons through his wife, who was a ballet dancer and choreographed the Comme des Garçons fashion shows. And I think, you know, this is also something that we continue to explore, but a lot of the promotional material that has been made in a fashion context and by these larger fashion houses, I think budget and economy is a big factor. You know, this is material that is produced not to be sold, but again, to be circulated for free. It's distributed for free on a store counter, or these Comme des Garçons mailers that just arrived in the mail to announce that the spring-summer, 96 collection was finally arrived, and so on. But it's amazingly produced. You know, the quality of some of this material is fantastic, with the best copywriters, the best photographers, the best artist commissions, the best stylists, and so on.
Craziest layouts, like the Comme des Garçons magazines that are like the publications are kind of, the paper is cut in different ways and put together, so it's kind of like a little journey in 4 or 5 pages.
Yeah. And I think Comme des Garçons is one of the fashion houses, but there's also a lot of other designers and fashion houses that have worked very, closely with paper material and paper publications and continue to do so. I think, to have the opportunity to go through both, our own library archive collection and UKS's collection, and also back in the days when I used to go to Rogaland Kunstsenter and explore Geir's collection, and I'm looking forward to doing it again soon that it's coming closer to Oslo, is that these archives are activized and mediated through the bodies that come in contact with them, and there's a lot of oral stories and a lot of anecdotes that come with each of the objects. And I think that's exciting to be able to present. I can do a couple of, from the library of fashion research, I kind of did a best of selection a little bit in a hurry this morning, just bringing a wider range of the types of materials that we have. So there's the Yoshi Yamamoto postcards, there's a backstage pass from Dries van Noten 2010 show. There's a cigarette pack by a Camel cigarette pack that was an artist limited edition commission with Nan Golden that I brought, which is unopened. Don't try to steal them. I know you want to smoke them.
What's the resale value?
They're a little bit dry. The tobacco's a little bit dry. It's from 1982, I think. And then there's also complete serendipity. I found a little big collaboration with Ryan McGinley, the photographer, so that they kind of speak together. I brought some illustrations that also correspond very well with some material that we found in UKS's archive, which is a bunch of drawings of Wenche Foss. Again, linking fashion, art, and celebrity culture. It's all coming together.
A celebrity in the UKS archive.
Right. And so, what else? The Comme des Garçons mailers, of course. I mean, I'm happy to also just do a little run through after the talk and just a quick run through of the different objects. Press releases as well from Helmut Lang's show. I mean, Helmut Lang was one of many designers who have left the kind of commercially successful an eponymous fashion house and become an artist. And there's some press releases from his Sperone Westwater show. So again, linking this kind of fashion and art spaces together. A Margiela catalog. Yeah, I don't remember all of it
There's
now.
a lot of good stuff.
Yes, a best stuff. And with UKS, it was a pleasure to look through everything. And again, it was kind of just picking out some boxes and just starting somewhere. One of the first things that we discovered was this catalog from, I think, 1982, which was a show of Nordic young artists. And within that, there was so basically each artist had done a couple of spreads each featuring their work, and I just opened a random page, and we had just spoken about the Living Art Museum, the museum that is has a donation-based collection of artworks and printed matter, an amazing archive that I was fortunate enough to explore last year in Reykjavik. But Jan Foss is also an amazing, artist, but also an organizer. He founded, together with two other Icelandic artists, the Bookie Wookie store that's in Amsterdam, which is a very important artist bookstore. They just relocated. So that was very fun discovering. There was also an application to the Norwegian embassy in Vienna for this Austrian artist show that was also at UKS. I don't remember exactly which year, but it's out there. So a lot of documents. Yeah, and some other leaflets. There's also a very fun publication that just says, what is an archive? Hva er et arkiv? That was released by the National Library.
Yeah.
Which I don't know.
Which maybe you know more about,
Yeah.
Kaja.
Yeah, it's from a seminar I went to, and I don't think I really got the answer to that question.
But maybe you could also say, why does UKS have a bunch of portraits of Wenche Foss?
Oh, well, it was we pulled it out inspired by the visit to your library, our only celebrity in the archive. It's from a portrait competition in 1966. It was a 5-hour session where Wenche Foss sat for 10 UKS members, artists, sort of like the NRK series Portrettmesterskapet, if you've seen it. We started it. And they were sold the coming weekend, and the funds were to go to some refurbishment of their spaces in Rådhusgata 19, where UKS stayed from 1937 until 2000-ish, where Gallery Bo is now. And these are the remnants of that sale. The portraits made by Ludvig Eikås, Asle Råen, Inger Sitter, and Siri Aurdal, legends in their own right, were not sold. So they're in our archive and now displayed here.
And there I also wanted to ask all of you regarding, like as you say, portrait made by Inger Sitter, and these things that also, objects in archives can also shift value over time. And how how do you think about that and deal with that?
Well, I think making the library and parts of the archive public in Stavanger, I just had a friend design a logo and a stamp, so I would stamp everything to make it less valuable to take. So it defacing it, stamp, to make sure that it was branded somehow. So that was one way to also, of course, limit the value of a resale. So there's no chance to get the top dollar for any of those items after they're kind of stamped to death. Library copies are still sold, but it was just one gesture that is used in the libraries again to make sure you don't steal the books, that they kind of bear a stamp. But yeah, it's tricky. It could be a way to finance, more ventures in the archives. I'm renting a new space now that costs money. You have to pay all these bills for it, and I want shelving that works for heavy library things. So you need to invest. It costs money. So it could be, which of my children should I sell to fund the rest of the children, the family?
I was just speaking of these beautiful memoirs by Marcia Tucker, the founder of the New Museum, who also decided quite deliberately to sell off the collection every 10th year, 7th year. I think
every 5 years or something. There was a turnover of the collection to be the new museum, not the old museum. Which
is also interesting, how fearful and how scared should you be to kind of reinvent the collection? I mean, there's a lot of different strategies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I also wanted to ask you, Elise, for the library, like as you said, you've had a lot of donations and it has increased a lot. Like, how do you decide what do you accept and what do you not? Like, how does that work?
I think that's a very collective practice, process. And, my role is more kind of, overlooking the programming and, making sure that we have space and climate regulated air conditioning, which we don't have yet. And I don't think we'll ever have, acid-free boxes and so on. I think it's, we have an advisory board, a board of directors who also help us steer the directions of where the collection and the programming is going. And that consists of a lot of people from not just fashion, but also different other fields such as architecture and the contemporary art scene and so on, and archive specialists. So I think it has to be a collective effort. It's a library. It's not a private collection anymore. It's also supposed to grow in all the different directions that it needs to be. I mean, we have because of the collections kind of stemming from a 70-year-old white American man. It's also quite Europe and America focused, and that's also something we're trying to kind of work on and expand and push in different directions through research projects and through involving a community of people. But I think that's always a hard thing. I mean, we have the luxury problem of receiving a lot of donation requests. There's a lot of people want to get rid of their material, so we have to say no to a lot of things. With magazines, for example, we only accept full collections because it's so hard to, for example, find this one April 1963 issue of Vogue. I mean, that's impossible to fill these kind of holes. But an archive, again, will always have holes to fill, and what's missing and what's not there can be almost as interesting as what's there in a way.
Yeah, and I think that is something we've been thinking a lot about here at UKS, and also around the 100th anniversary in 2021, this question of all the things that are not in the archive, which says as much about the history as those materials. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this.
Well, I'm mostly an expert on the archive from 1921 to 1971. I had to stop somewhere. But that part of the archive is very much made by the people working at UKS. It's you can see their day-to-day work being made in the archive, which is very organizational and bureaucratic. But it's also very random, I think, what ends up in our archives. The most interesting exhibition might just have run out of folders and it's not there anymore. And somebody forgot to note it down in the annual report, so it might be gone. So yeah, it's...
Well, I'm also thinking about all the things that we didn't question or deal with during the 100th anniversary. They will maybe never be looked into, or all these things that are also a part of these archives. And I guess for you, like as a private collector, it's a bit different, but also defined by your tastes and.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I work at the museum, so we deal a lot with the sort of, again, the responsibility of a public institution. So I feel I have like a nice balance there. So I can have two different mindsets on what to focus on. So also like, if I know there's material that is commonplace, I might not be as invested in it, So that's also a way to sort through stuff as well. And that's maybe also how you, sometimes I work in the art field as well. Like if everybody's going after something, then they can do that. And then I can focus on something else.
Yeah. And then you mentioned this a bit earlier, but where does an archive end?
Well, the example with Stephen, asking another person to deal with it, pick up the pieces, but then make something more accessible, maybe like value in a different way. Because he collected from a personal point of view and you come to see it from a different objective. You were not the person choosing this. You just deal with the mass. So again, the mass of the UKS archive is very different, but it's like, where does it go? For archives, there's a lot of personal archives that don't go anywhere except for the trash. And that's, the archive is kind of like this accumulation of stuff. It's not in any case, a perfect representation of anything. But thinking about that physical archive versus the digital archives that most people deal with now is also like a nightmare. All the filing systems, technology changing, how do you keep up? This hard drive is lost. So it seems like even more imperfect in a way. So having access to like the time travel in the objects is kind of what draws me towards these physical things, and realizing that the digital is also, of course, I am on the internet, but it's just like, again, like keeping the balance between these things as well.
Yeah.
So I have like a PDF collection of all the things that I want to read someday, and sometimes I read, but
we all do.
But just having access to the books is or like the archive is a very different thing.
Yeah.
I think that the archive ends a little bit where it begins, which is in the trash. And Geir and I always wrote about this in the Wallet publications as well, that a lot of fashion actually happens in the trash, and fashion can be displayed and exhibited in the trash. No, but I think that there's this kind of, picking up the remnants and things that are disposed of and that other people don't see the value of. I think that's very important, a very important part of collecting and archiving. But again, asking other people to deal with the holdings or doing different kind of activizations, like inviting in an external curator or a guest curator or a guest researcher to see and work and expand the collection and take it into directions that I could never do, that the in-house team could never do. I think that's very important also for it to live on or to be reincarnated in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, and you also spoke a bit about this earlier, but as you say, also when you activate the archive, that also makes it more likely that the object could deteriorate, and which is also, of course, a question when you have a library and an archive. And so how do you think around this in your work?
I mean, we only have we don't really have duplicates of the stuff that we have accessible. So of course there is this kind of duality. On one hand, to archive it properly and to put it into these acid-free boxes and to have it, in this climate-regulated space, and to put it into storage. That's a way of keeping the material alive and fresh and not damaged. On the other hand, there's also this importance, and this, for me, it's a responsibility to also make it accessible and to have people touch it with no white gloves, because that's, with paper, it's a little bit fragile to use gloves anyway. We prefer clean hands. But I think there will always be this kind of, question. How do we preserve it or do we activate it? And for us, the answer is to activate it. And things are becoming, a little bit damaged. I mean, we're just 1.5 years into being public. So, but also then again, our collection goes back to 1975. So it's still quite new and contemporary. So we're pushing a lot of our, future library issues. We're pushing them back. It's for another day.
And there, I guess we could also, we mentioned that UKS's archive is not does not belong to UKS. It was given to Riksarkivet, most of it, which I guess is also because the institution doesn't mainly work with archives.
Yes. I'm very much an accidental archive manager. And I should really be working on getting the archive ready to be delivered back to Riksarkivet. I really want to join it together with the remnants we have of stuff that we've moved around, like the catalog of members box and a lot of posters. And also these Wenche Foss portraits has also been traveling along with us. Hasn't been at Riksarkivet. So I have a dream of joining all the physical parts of the UKS archive and handing it back to Riksarkivet, where I know it will be in safe hands, and also with the clause that it's open to the public, even though it's stored in Privatarkivet. You can go to Riksarkivet in that weird building up at Sognsvann and have a look at it.
Yeah. I think we should open and see if there are any questions. No? No questions.
Too fast. Too fast.
Too fast. Too fast. Elise, you also, maybe you could also speak a bit about, you mentioned to us earlier that you're now also perhaps thinking of expanding and also starting to collect exhibition architecture or fashion architecture as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that has happened again through these donation offers that we're looking into a different kind of, or a new kind of archival strategy. So we were offered last year the front row seats of this spring-summer 23 Prada show, which was these cardboard boxes that the VIPs and so on would sit on for the Prada show that was in Milan, and they were made out of cardboard. So of course it was it was relevant for our paper interest, but that kind of forced us to think about fashion show seats and exhibition props as a kind of as ephemera, and they say something about a certain time, a certain moment. And so we're exploring that. We just recently got offered, well, as of yesterday, we got offered Gaetano Pesce, the Italian designer and artist's front row seats for the Bottega Veneta show. They're amazing. They're like these colored epoxy, almost like semi-transparent seats. So we're looking into receiving that as well. And we also we worked together with Willem Christensen to store a series of part auditorium seats, part kind of exhibitional props, or how do you call it, podiums that he created for his show at Oslo Kunstforening, which just was taken down. And so there's always this question of, again, rescuing something from the trash, and do we want to see it go, or do we want to have it stay? I mean, that's always the question. So we're trying to explore different kind of different collections within the collection, which is very exciting. Another thought just about where the archive ends and where an archive goes to die. I was speaking yesterday with the designer Shelley Fox, who's a professor in fashion studies in New York, but she was also a solo designer in the 90s, and she just during COVID bought a house upstate New York, a little hut, and she put all of her old collections. So she had one piece of everything that she ever made. And she went to London Fashion Week, and paradoxically, she came home after Fashion Week to her entire clothing archive being eaten by mice. Oh. So there's also like this kind of, and after that we received her entire printed matter archive, because she said, this needs kind of an external storage. And there's also Hussein Chalayan, the conceptual fashion designer, who allegedly also buried, every time he had a fashion show, he took the pieces that were put on the fashion show, on the catwalk, on the models. He took every piece of clothing and he buried it in this London-based Turkish poet's garden.
There's many ways to archive.
Yes. Or you burn them down.
Were they in like coffins, like they were preserved in the ground? Or
I would love to do a research project, just like getting some people together and kind of like see,
digging.
go digging in this garden. I don't know.
Yeah, and then I also maybe wanted to ask you, Geir, from a curator's perspective, how do you work with archives as a curator?
No, I mean it's such a resource depending on the archive again, but it's I think one of the basic principles of archiving is that you keep everything, right? It's like this provenience thing. So you don't start sorting through and like, okay, this is interesting, this is crap, this is interesting, because then you ruin the archive in a way. So my selection, so you usually access something and you get to see like everything that was there, the bits and bobs, and that's the interesting part, because then you can see something that maybe somebody else thought was trash. So again, like the trash gold principle. So I think that's one thing. So you're allowed to sort of filter through with your own mindset, so you can find stuff that you might be interested in the archive, as long as it's preserved in a way. If somebody has already done the sorting for you, there's not much for me to access beyond what has already been written. And I think that happens with a lot of artists, both like intentionally and unintentionally. Like, some mice might get to it first, but also heard a Brazilian artist, then there was a fire, but there wasn't a fire, they were just like burning the letters talking about his homosexuality, so it's like the families are censoring things in ways that make sense to the family, but you destroy access to this information about maybe the more complexities of an artist's work and the artist's life. Also the thing about an artist's work and biography, that's how they come together. In some cases it's more complicated than others, but it's also accessing those things and also making sure that like how to filter it in a way. So there's some ethical issues there as well, but a lot of like you're talking about porträttmästerskapet with like kunstnerliv as well, how that sort of merges the feelings and emotions and maybe not the artwork. So how do you balance that out in a way? So if you find a diary and you find all this juicy stuff, what has that got to do with the work? Well, maybe it could explain why the work was made. I did the show with Cindy Sherman, not with the real work, but just like basing it on trying to understand her work, because she was making these work that were very important to me as like a aspiring artist and curator, but then finding like these clown portraits don't make any sense to me. It was just like going crazy with Photoshop. But then I realized she was dating Steve Martin at the time, a comedian. So it's like, okay. So sometimes the circumstances can make things click. And I haven't talked to her about it, but like at least then I have a theory to try and understand why all these clown portraits. So again, it's like accessing material outside of the art historical materials and maybe what's printed in some of the catalogs. Like the archive can give you access to that if it's allowed, if it's not burnt in a fire or eaten by mice.
Yeah. I think if there are still no questions, then I think...
As well. Yeah.
Oh yes, go for it.
Firstly, I'm like, wow, it's so interesting to listen to. And to the moderator, I mean, you have just picked three like excellent people to sort of weigh up. Do I really need this?
for the recording.
For the recording.
Yeah. For the archive. I think. Yeah.
So totally interesting to listen to every single word of what you're saying, and like to categorize you, the hippie archive, UKS by far. No, Geir, not you. You are organized I mean, you have boxes that are like undiscovered. So my God. But and you were the like classic nerd, Geir, the nerd. Yeah, totally. And you are the control freak, Elise. I was at the control freak thing. But what I found extremely interesting, what you said, Elise, about the holes in the archive, the things missing is as interesting as the things in the archive, which sort of sounds like an opposition to archives in itself. And in connection, the holes, and in connection to where does archives go to die? I mean, in one sense, you of course represent a very nerdy and dying profession altogether, or a hobby, or whatever you call it. It's for Elise definitely like a profession and work and career, and a very important one, being the first in the world. I think. However, like if you look 50 years into, are there any artist books left materialized in paper? Are there any like ephemera from the fashion industry, printed matter? I don't think so. And well, how would we deal with you dying guys?
Well,
I'm sorry.
When I first met Elise as well, she was, it's a young person, totally invested in printed matter. So like the death of printed material. I think we had Craig from Printed Matter give a presentation at Elise's library last week, and he was bringing all these fanzines that are current and today. So printed matter is still here even after the internet came and is still here. So it's like, these things change how things happen, but we'll still have printed stuff in a way, I hope. Right? Like the detritus, all the stuff that isn't available online. And then as soon as you change a website, the archive is gone from that website, even though that was like the place where you could find information, like the old UKS website. Where is that? Is that part of the archive?
It's transferred to the new one. Yeah, I mean, UKS's archive, I mean, we also have a very big digital archive. Also on the website, it's actually a lot of resources going back all the way to the 30s, at least.
There, yes.
Yeah, but obviously this is also something we have been speaking a lot about, this question of also the size of the digital archive, because we produce so much images, especially big files, and like how do we keep that for the future? And obviously it's also quite vulnerable, also the digital archive, but it's there, and we are still archiving, but we're also still archiving we try to be consistent, but I guess we're not always.
It's a lot like, I think UKS's archive has largely gone digital, like our bureaucratic and program related stuff is mostly digital, and it's sometimes quite a lot of stuff, since we think it doesn't take up space. But I think, it's interesting going forward to see how to keep a digital archive healthy.
The other thing is the opposite. Like all the digital stuff will be gone because we can't sustain it. So we're back to like pen and paper.
Yeah.
Instagram feeds as well. I mean, I have this new interest in looking into all of these fashion houses' first Instagram posts, because they have 10,000s of posts on their profiles. I mean, that's a different thing as well. I will just say one quick thing, which is another thing that we're exploring. We had an amazing visit yesterday of this guy who had been documenting early Sex Pistols and Vivienne Westwood's shows, so backstage footage and interviews with the designer, but also with the models and press that was backstage after the show and the actual show. And he said he had thousands and thousands of hours of this video footage that was shot mainly on 16 millimeters, so it was film. And he has this large warehouse outside of London in Canterbury and 120 projectors. And he's like, do you want it? And we're like, yes, of course we would like it, but you know, someone needs to give us a little bit of space. So there's also that, like film and digital files and old websites and the cloud. Yeah.
I recommend Corey Archangel's recent show at the Michael Majerus estate in Berlin. It's available on YouTube as well, where he opens this artist who passed away in 2002 in a plane crash. They open his Mac G3 machine in an emulator, because there's also like, there's no way that machine will run because it was also in the plane crash with the artist when he died. But it's like this amazing like archival study of our recent history and how that's even possible. It's like this miracle worker when you can access a file from 2001.
Yeah.
Archaeology.
Yeah. Archivology. So should we take a look?
Yes, I think we should take a look. And also I just wanted to say we will be open until 9, and the minibar is out there if anyone wants to get a drink. Yeah?